Grief is like being stuck in the past. When you lose someone who is a part of you, they are still a part of you, even if they aren't here anymore. A part of your habits, your pattern of life, your rhythm. You go back to the places where you once spent time together, and a part of you feels like she'll still be there. And the crazy thing is, sometimes you do see her. But you look again, and you realize that it was just a trick. Your brain was shaping someone else to look like her. It's like grief is a constant, involuntary recreation of an old reality in the midst of a strange new one. And we know that the healthy thing is to move forward into that new reality, to adapt and create a new kind of life. But what if someone did not move forward? What if he actually went so far as to really do the thing that the grieving brain only imagines, to recreate the woman he lost? Well, then we would have Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, the story of a man who strikes up a relationship with a young woman only to transform her so that she looks exactly like the woman he lost, recreating every little detail, even though she really does not want that. In recent decades, feminists have come to celebrate Vertigo as a poetic portrayal of male fragility, oppression, and the male gaze, a prophetic denunciation of the way men supposedly attempt to visually control women in society. However, such interpretations, if they are true at all, tell only half the truth, and all but completely ignore the fact that our protagonist, Scotty Ferguson, is not a normal man. He is a man in the midst of grief, deeply disturbed by a slew of traumas. And the reason he is so traumatized in the first place is because he himself was transformed and even mentally programmed by a woman. I have loved Vertigo for a very long time, but one of the things that has recently caught my attention is the way that the villains of the film use the physical spaces of San Francisco and the pattern of light and dark spaces to engineer a man's emotional responses, including the responses of love and grief. What Hitchcock does here is almost subliminal. So, in order to understand this pattern, let me briefly refresh you on how the plot begins. It all starts when an old college friend hires Scotty, who is a retired detective, to follow his wife Madeline, because Madeline has been acting strangely, as if she is even possessed by the ghost of her great-grandmother.
Scotty, do you believe that someone out of the past, someone dead, can enter and take possession of a living being?
No.
If I told you that I believe this has happened to my wife, what would you say?
In an unexpected twist, or perhaps not so unexpected, Scotty ends up falling in love with Madeline. At one point, he steps in to save her life after she jumps into San Francisco Bay, and the two strike up an actual relationship. But it only becomes more obvious that Madeline really is mentally troubled. She cannot remember certain things that she has done. She acts compulsively, and she has strange dreams, none of which make sense. But Scotty is determined to take care of Madeline and prove that she is neither possessed nor insane. Unfortunately, however, during one of her episodes, Madeline does succeed in compulsively jumping from a bell tower to her demise, and Scotty is unable to stop her and save her because of his crippling vertigo. And naturally, Scotty is devastated by this loss, blaming himself for not saving the woman he loved.
He could not face the tragic result of his own weakness and ran away. It is a matter between him and his own conscience.
Unable to move past his grief, Scotty goes so far as to stalk a young woman named Judy back to her apartment because she reminds him of Madeline. Just being around her is enough to slake the pain of loss.
Judy, I tell you this, these past few days have been the first happy days I've known in a year.
I know.
I know because I remind you of her.
But of course, the major twist of the film is that Judy is Madeline. To be more precise, Judy is an actress who was hired to play the part of Madeline in an elaborate murder conspiracy where Gavin Elster killed his wife, the real Madeline, and in order to cover up the crime, Gavin hired Judy to make Scotty think that she was Madeline, so that when she seems to leap from the bell tower to her demise, it would make the real Madeline's death look self-inflicted, instead of being the murder that it really was, thus giving Gavin a cover-up for his crime. However, in order for this insanely intricate plot to work, Gavin has to make Scotty fall in love with Judy, making him care deeply about her, and even to obsess over her, in order to guarantee that he will follow her up the bell tower to try and save her life. And they succeed in doing this in programming Scotty by using an elaborate form of conditioning. The parts of the film that are often seen as the most boring, the sequences where Scotty follows Madeline through San Francisco, are actually an elaborate theatrical performance designed to change the way Scotty perceives Madeline, specifically by conditioning his emotional responses. The idea is that if you can change the way a person sees, then you can change the way they feel, and vice versa. This change in perception is accomplished through a basic pattern. When Scotty follows Madeline, notice how her route follows what seems to be a highly choreographed pattern of movements from darkness to light. First, Madeline stops in a drab alleyway and goes into a store through a back room instead of going in the front. And the purpose of this is so that when Scotty follows her, he goes from being in a dark room to a sudden explosion of color. Next, we go from the bright outdoors to the dark interior of a church, and then back out into the brilliant light of a cemetery, which, rather than being a creepy graveyard, seems to be more like a paradisal garden. After the cemetery, we follow Madeline to the art museum. We go from the bright and beautiful outdoors to the shadowy interior and then again into the light. None of these shadow spaces were logically necessary for the film, and Hitchcock could easily have simply told the story of a man falling in love with a beautiful woman without this pattern of darkness and light. However, from an artistic perspective, the contrast makes each scene much more interesting visually, and in terms of the story itself, this pattern makes Vertigo much more complex. This sequence becomes a cycle of conditioning which ultimately ends with disappointment and confusion. When Scotty trails Madeline to a hotel that is dark and brooding on the inside, the hotel manager says that Madeline was not there that day, even though Scotty saw her walk in. And because there is no explosion of color which follows the shadow, Scotty is left in the darkness, subliminally unsatisfied. This confusion and sense of expectation leave him further open to suggestion and reorientation. The required satisfaction comes when Scotty follows Madeline the second time, which ends with Madeline jumping into the bay and Scotty seemingly saving her life. This is the moment that reels Scotty in, because it not only gives Scotty the subliminal satisfaction that he craves, but in a sense, it gives Scotty back the life that he has lost. You see, at the beginning of the film, Scotty had a traumatic experience where he almost died, and a fellow officer did die, which causes Scotty to retire from being a police detective because he blames himself for allowing that other officer to die. Because of his vertigo, he feels impotent. He sees himself as a liability. So he gives up his career, and he loses his role as a heroic figure in society, as a man who confronts danger and saves lives. And when Madeline comes along, he is able to regain that old life. He can once again be the saver of lives, the detective, the solver of puzzles. He can fix her problems. even the colors which Hitchcock uses usher us into Scotty's frame of mind. The dazzling reds subliminally communicate to us and to Scotty that Madeline is a source of danger, a danger which Scotty craves, while the brilliant greens, which tend to have a calming effect, may even suggest that she is a source of life. As a character, Madeline embodies Carl Jung's archetype of the anima in external human form. She is a challenge which demands from man his highest potential, while also being a comforting consolation for when a man, as a fallible and vulnerable being, will inevitably fail in the course of taking risks for the good of other people. At the same time, she is the great illusionist, the seductress, who draws him into life with her Maya, and not only into life's reasonable and useful aspects, but into its frightful paradoxes and ambivalences, where good and evil, success and ruin, hope and despair counterbalance one another. Because she is his greatest danger, she demands from a man his greatest, and if he has it in him, she will receive it.
I stood alone on the green, searching for something. And then I started to walk to the church. Then the darkness closed in, and I was alone in the dark, being pulled into the darkness. I fought to wake up.
You're going to be all right now, Madeline. Don't you see you've given me something to work on now? I'm going to take you down there to that mission this afternoon, and when you see it, you'll remember when you saw it before, and it'll finish your dream. It'll destroy it, I promise you.
Here, Judy is priming Scotty for the final cover-up at the Spanish mission by using the symbolic language of color and darkness, which represents death. At the Spanish mission, we return to the old pattern of light and dark. Hitchcock begins by putting us in a dark carriage house. Then Madeline flees, and Scotty pursues her out into the dazzling sunlight, and then follows her again into the dark church, as if he were following a program. Based on Madeline's behavior and dreams, Scotty knows the moment Madeline runs to the bell tower that she will try to harm herself, but because of his vertigo, he is not able to follow her, which means that instead of emerging into the light, which is what his new programming wants, he remains trapped in the darkness.
He claims he suffered a mental blackout and knew nothing more until he found himself back in his own apartment in San Francisco several hours later. You may accept that or not.
His story is stuck. He can no longer move forward. And so the reason why Scotty goes back to all the places that he had seen Madeline, her apartment, Ernie's restaurant, the art museum, the flower shop, is not just because of normal grief, though it can certainly seem like it, and that is the point. Hitchcock is pulling a sleight of hand on us. Because you may know what this is like, to think that you see someone that you've lost or that you're in love with, only for it to be someone else. Hitchcock uses this poignant piece of human psychology to make us sympathize with Scotty. However, Scotty's condition is far from normal. Once we eventually know the whole story, then we realize that the reason Scotty keeps seeing Madeline is that he has been trained to need her in order to live a basic life as a normal, non-traumatized man. Diodorus Siculus tells the story of a god that is cut into pieces and scattered over the earth. Which of us, walking through the twilight, or retracing some day in our past, has never felt that we have lost some infinite thing? When Scotty tells Judy that she should not have been so sentimental, we can see in his eyes that he realizes the same is true of himself. He should not have been so sentimental about Madeline. But just because you shouldn't live in the past doesn't mean that it's easy. Not only does Scotty cling to a woman he loved and lost, but he also compulsively clings to the guilt of letting two people die. Scotty's acrophobia seems to be tied to his feelings of guilt about the past. In fact, according to the psychologists in the film, The only way to escape the trauma response is through a shock that is equivalent to what caused it. And though I can't say that this is sound clinical advice, it is powerfully thematic. In Vertigo, this principle means that the sickness is also the cure. Scotty can only escape the past by going into the past.
I have to go back into the past once more, just once more. And when it's done, we'll both be free.
To be more specific, Scotty has to understand the past for what it really was. By reenacting the past, Scotty is able to demonstrate that he was not really guilty for allowing Madeline to die. And more importantly, he realizes that the woman he had been so obsessed with is not who he thought she was. This is an important key to moving forward. To let go of the past, we have to consider that the past might not be what we think it is. And this applies as much to our guilts as to our loves. If Scotty realizes that he does not know the whole story behind Madeline, then maybe he does not know the full truth behind any part of his life. Scotty can no longer feel completely guilty, even about the death of the officer in the beginning, because he does not know everything that went into what happened. The famous psychologist Abraham Maslow helpfully pointed out that human beings tend to perceive the world around us in one of two ways, because everything has a twofold nature, which he called the B side and the D side. The B side refers to being or growth, characteristics which affirm life and can even seem divine. Thus, he writes, "It is possible to see the woman under the aspect of her being." Another way of saying this is that she is to be seen in her sacred rather than the profane aspects, or under the holy or pious aspects, or from the point of view of eternity or infinity, from the point of view of perfection, of the ideal end goal, from the point of view of what, in principle, any woman could have become. But everything and everyone also has a D side, which stands for our deficiencies or shortcomings, the parts of us which are boring or annoying, dirty and disgusting, immoral or unethical, or even simply transient. We are beings who fade, pass away, and are eventually forgotten. The D aspect and the B aspect are equally true. When it comes to men, Maslow defines a man's B aspect as the spirit of rationality, of intelligence, of probing and exploring, of mathematics. The male as a father image is strong and capable, fearless, noble, clean, not trivial, not small, a protector of the weak, the innocent, children and orphans and widows, the hunter and bringer of food, and so on. The idea that a 20-something woman would fall in love with a traumatized man over half her age who she was hired to con only becomes believable if Maslow is correct about human nature. Even though Scotty is a broken man, Judy comes to see him in his eternal transcendent dimension, rational, intelligent, fatherly, clean, a protector of the weak. However, the love that Judy has for Scotty is what eventually becomes her own undoing. And this is where we see the danger of perceiving someone only as a divine, perfect B individual. Because when we do so, we tend to accept that person totally, to surrender ourselves to them, and to trust them without question. We are less selfish and more willing to give, which is why Scotty is taken in by Madeline, and why Judy allows herself to be manipulated by Scotty. there is an equal danger if we only see the B dimension even in ourselves. Scotty Ferguson becomes trapped in his life because he sees himself in his own B aspect. He is trapped by his own guilt because he cannot accept his own deficiencies. He thinks that he should be a godlike savior who can save everyone around him and pierce through every mystery and solve every problem. But part of accepting our own deficiencies means that we cannot control everything. We cannot save everyone or know the whole truth about ourselves or other people. Sometimes we can save people, but we are not the ultimate savior. We are just the images of the one who is. On the other hand, if we only see people in their D aspects, we can have no relationship with them except to exploit them, which is why Maslow encourages us to see the B aspect even in the lowest kind of men and women. In Kierkegaard's formula, we are a synthesis of infinite and finite, both of which must be honored. We have to make peace with our eternal and infinite appetites, as well as with our transience. Vertigo is cathartic yet cautionary, because it shows us how those godlike heights can sabotage us if we use them irresponsibly. But even if we do fall, there is hope. Just as in the opening titles of the film, we, the audience, fall into the eyes of a stranger, and there, at the bottom, we find the eye of a predator. But in the end, we are able, like Scotty Ferguson, to rise back out.